This is the Latin News Podcast. I am Richard McCall, your host here in Bogota, Colombia. My very special guest this week is none less than Ronald Alfaro-Redondo. He's in Costa Rica. He's a researcher in the Political Science Department of the Universidad de Costa Rica, or the University of Costa Rica. He's also a researcher for the State of the Nation program. And last week, the 23rd of November, they released the State of Nation report. You can find that on their website. But let me remind all the listeners out there that this is the final episode of the year of 2023 for the Latin News Podcast. We will be back on the 16th of January discussing, well, the future presidency of Milei in Argentina. But for now, welcome on the Latin News Podcast, Ronald Alfaro-Redondo.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's my pleasure. It's good to talk to you this day.
It's good to talk about Costa Rica. You know, Costa Rica obviously is in the shadow of El Salvador, Guatemala, and of course Nicaragua at the moment. But I think we need to discuss what's going on because there's some turbulent times in Costa Rica at the moment, and I think this is best put if we explain who the President Rodrigo Chaves is with regards to the sort of populism taking over the region.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Rodrigo Chaves is the current president of Costa Rica, and he is an economist. He worked for many years in international institutions like World Bank, especially, and now he's coming to the second year of the administration. It's going to be on May 2024, second year. So it's coming to half of the administration now.
So he's halfway through almost. How much can we attribute his election as president to, or how important was Pilar Cisneros in this election?
Well, yeah, she was an important part of the campaign as well. Now she's the leader of the legislative party, right? The officialist, and she's perhaps the closest, the closest person to the current president.
Okay, but of course she's born in Peru, but sort of grew up her formative years in Costa Rica, which prohibited it, I suppose, her from running. My friends on the ground say that she was, pivotal in garnering support.
Yeah, especially because she's a journalist and it's a well-known journalist. She was in the TV news for a long time, so she's a public figure in that kind.
Yeah. So great recognition, of course, for Pilar Cisneros. Right. And so, President Rodrigo Chaves, he's very straight talking. Sure. Some say he's arrogant. Obviously, that doesn't rub people up the right way if he's straight talking. But he comes in really at a time, and regionally so, where there is a great discontent with the established political class. Can you explore a little bit as to what actually is going on?
Yeah, well, the president or the current government relies on a very simple but very sophisticated communication kind of strategy, right? The president, all the weeks on Wednesdays, they have like this conference, in which many of the cabinet is there, and they have this long conversation with journalists and questions and answers, and also they communicate. They have a very sophisticated communication strategy for that. So in that way, that is a different kind of aspect of the government, but it's in some ways unique for the Costa Rican perspective. We know that internationally, so all these leaders, they have this connection or this contact with their bases or their the people they support or they rely on. So, but in the Costa Rican cases, it's in some way unique. especially because even the president itself is a strong figure in terms of this communication. And now we have to go back to the election in 2024 to see what are the conditions under which Rodrigo Chaves is governing now. Mm-hmm. He was able to attract voters who were undecided. A lot of people were undecided during that campaign. And well, he was the different option, right? He was an alternative for traditional parties, or even for the party in government, the Acción Ciudadana party, who was in government during 8 years, right? And well, he attracted those voters. He got those electoral support, but that was for the presidential election. For the legislative election, his party he got a small portion of vote, and his legislative party now is 10 representatives out of 57. Our Congress is small, but still the president is in minority. The president's party in Congress is in minority. So in the Costa Rican system, political system, when you have these conditions, which are not necessarily new, because we have seen this in the past, these conditions, you are in a situation in which other actors and you depend on other actors, right? So you have to build coalitions, you have to negotiate, you have to bargain with those actors in order to reach or to get, your things, or your interest, your policies, all these kind of factors. But previous presidents in the same kind of conditions, they relied on coalitions, legislative coalitions, to move their agenda, right? However, the evidence that we have in our national report about human development, we know that the president in some way abandoned, right, the coalition building process, which it turns the things more complicated, right?
So, I mean, he abandoned this, as you say, the traditional coalition, the coalition practice, and also he's doing this, let's say, Wednesday, speaking to the people, speaking out. I mean, does he fall under the umbrella of Central American populism in this respect?
Well, in some way, but we can identify some, similar kind of trends or this. However, again, the Costa Rican political system is a decentralized system, right? The executive power, or the executive branch, is a key player, is a very important player, obviously, but is not the dominant player, which is important differences, right? Especially when you compare the Costa Rican political powers of the president with presidential powers in Latin America, right? And in that regard, the president relies on the support of other political parties, right? Especially in Congress. But abandoning the coalition practice is not necessarily the best strategy, right? For political purposes. Yeah. Because in Costa Rica, the president lacks of the possibility of roll the dice again, right? It is, well, these are the conditions under the president is governing, and those conditions remain all the administration, right? We don't have midterm elections, we don't have consecutive re-election, so the president can be re-elected, but he has to wait one period out of the presidency to compete. We lack of the midterm. We don't have re-election, consecutive re-election, and also we don't have army, right? So, and all those mechanisms, the presidential figures in Latin America has been using those mechanisms to to expand their political power, especially when they have these difficult circumstances to govern.
The issue of having no midterms is very interesting indeed. As you say, it doesn't allow him to roll the dice, doesn't allow him to have a period grace. Indeed, I mean, it's very interesting indeed that I was not aware of this. So, what is President Chavez's approval rating at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's another important, I would say, or a singular feature, right, or characteristic, because President Chaves, start his administration with the highest approval rate in decades, 30 decades, around 30 decades. So his political capital was strong, a lot of support. People were in his side. Most of the people were in his side. I'm talking about approval rating close to 80, wow. Right? 80%, right? So which is high for even for our political context, right? Very high. But one of the laws of the all political phenomenons is that, well, high approval ratings are difficult to maintain, but also, the natural process is this erosion, right? Gradual erosion in political support. So the president now is in the around 50s, right? Around 50s. So he has been losing support, but he still have high popular support when we compare his administration with previous ones, right? The high risk of this is that, well, the president is coming to halfway of his administration, and he can still be exposed to the higher erosion of support, right?
But to be at 50% almost 2 years in this region is, well, almost anywhere, I would say is a positive thing. But again, dropping from 80% in 2 years to 50%, but we could see that as predictable. Of course it is. I think he was elected in to try and shake things up in Costa Rica, to try and shake things up, and of course to combat a little bit the political elites that, of course, are behind the traditional parties we see in so many different countries. But these elites, they're not going anywhere. They're not going to disappear in this 4-year term. So how does he hope to achieve what he does with the rhetoric and trying to combat this?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, the strategy in this case relies on this idea that he can do, or his administration can do, different things. So this classic phrase of "get things done" is one of the ideas. However, the problem in the Costa Rican political system, is that, again, you have a decentralized design of power, and you have to the factor that avoids the system to get into crisis or gridlock, the version of our local gridlock, the factor that avoids the political system to be in that situation is the cooperation, right? Cooperation between powers, the judicial, the executive, the legislative, also political actors, political leaders. If they cooperate, they may have better chances to get things done, right? But now what we are seeing is that the strategy, the style of govern during the Rodrigo Chaves presidency is not necessarily cooperation, right? It's not a cooperative mechanism. It's more antagonistic. So it produces and provokes conflicts, disputes, and gridlock. So it is not so easy, for a president like him, with a high popularity, but with very weak support in Congress to move the agenda, right? And the effects of these disputes, controversies, or just these conflicts between powers, you can see it, right? The production of legislation is not so big. Also, it's not in the most relevant topics for citizens.
Yeah.
And he's experiencing this kind of difficulties for moving his agenda, and the opposition, they react, and we have a judicialization of all the political decisions, pretty much everything, right?
So when you say it's a judicialization, what exactly do you mean?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm talking about, in the Costa Rican case, the judicial system is a powerful one in terms of they have a mechanism to evaluate whether or not the political decisions are constitutional or not, right? The constitutional control, the classic version of the constitutional control. Our constitutional court is very powerful, and citizens, anyone in Costa Rica can ask the Supreme, or in this case, the Constitutional Court, to evaluate these circumstances. And when I mean everybody, I mean every citizen, even childs use Constitutional Court to, let's say, when they feel that their rights are in danger, they go to the Constitutional Court.
Okay.
And the laws, also the executive decrees, most of them are going to that process. And we know that the numbers and the number of cases that the Constitutional Court is evaluating regarding this constitutional evaluation are increasing, are getting high. And in the last year, we have seen the highest numbers in years.
So this is almost a dirty tricks campaign by the opposition to put brakes on any change trying to be pushed through by the administration of Rodrigo Chaves.
Right. That's so we, if the executive is not interested in building these coalitions, the opposition is reacting at the same time. If they do not negotiate, if they lack of mechanisms to coordinate, to cooperate, well, they are using other tools in some way to block the agenda, the government's agenda. And in the Costa Rican case, we have multiple checks and balances, and there are also autonomies, right? There are institutions, public institutions that are autonomy. So if the president wants to do something in that institution, most of the time, their autonomy, legal autonomy, is not or doesn't allow the president to do this kind of thing.
And one thing that we need to discuss, and obviously will be very present in your research agenda, is the attacks by the press on particularly La Nación, on Rodrigo Chaves, and of course the president's attacks on the press, vice versa. Tell us, I mean, does this stem from Chaves and others exposing that use of the pension money from La Nación for building the park, for concerts? I mean, it just goes on into this strange and convoluted, I would say, a kind of web of corruption.
Yeah, and the relationship between the media and the press and the governments in Costa Rica is always, it's always tense, right? It's always conflictual. There's always disputes, and but again, regarding what kind of topic, they remain, they respect each other. They have this kind of. However, in the last years, we have seen an increase in the number of cases, evaluated or analyzed by the Constitutional Court related to the freedom of expression, or in general, for the relationships between the government and the media. And these disputes are in some way showing that these rights are suffering for that kind of thing, right? So that's unusual, very unusual for the Costa Rican context, because, well, if media, they cover what the government do, and the government also sometimes they attack the media, well, but they respect in general. They have a relationship in which they respect each other. But now, even in international reports about the situation in Costa Rica, we have seen a decrease, an important decrease in that kind of issue.
Is there would you say, is an increase in the freedom? I mean, a decrease in the freedom of the press in Costa Rica then?
Yeah, especially related to attacks coming from the government to different TV or newspapers, most of the time for TV and newspapers, and these kind of national ones, and the oldest ones, I would say.
Okay, so yes, definitely. And we need to talk about something else in this conversation as well. I mean, it's something that is always of importance in the region. Costa Rica seems to, obviously, because of its history of a peaceful nation, the nation with no army, as you previously mentioned, and all the checks and balances in place, which seem to be incredibly well respected. But what's the security situation taking place in Costa Rica? We read about the drugs gangs, a capture recently. We're nowhere near the neighbors, Costa Rica's regional neighbors, but what's going on right now?
Yeah, we are going under one of the most, the severe kind of security crisis, especially related to homicides, right? The number of homicides in this year has been increasing as in any other period in our history. And we have the national police, we have no army, so we cannot rely on that kind of thing or use that as another tool. So we have the national police, we have the judicial system, and we are in this. All these institutions are right now under a lot of pressure because of how to manage, how to deal with this kind of thing. And also the government, the Ministry of Security, there was a replacement, I think mid-year this year, and because, well, something was the president was not satisfied with how those things were attacked. And again, now we have this difficult situation, especially for, let's say, for tourism and for locals as well, right? And we are trying to we have to find out alternatives for dealing with this important situation.
You say homicides, again, you say, have grown exponentially for Costa Rica, but what is the reason for this?
Most of those cases are related to drug trafficking, especially gangs and people involved in this drug dealing kind of thing. And yeah, most of them are men, young men, though they use like these arms and with very destructive kind of thing. So, but most of them are related to drug trafficking. Right?
And the gangs, these are multinational gangs, the ones that, let's say, the Tren de Aragua or from Venezuela, or associated with the Sinaloa or Nuevo Jalisco cartels?
Yeah, they're in some way associated with, especially Mexican in some way, or for South America also. And but those multinational kind of thing. But there are locals involved in that kind of thing as well.
And the production of fentanyl, I read, within Costa Rica.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let me. Sorry, my dog is,
It's okay. We all have dogs or children. It's okay.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah, can you repeat me the question again?
So I read about the production of fentanyl within
Yeah,
Costa Rica.
yeah. We have seen I think last week there was a police operation in order to to combat or this kind of thing, which is very serious. And yeah, most of the I think that the operation, they capture people in different places in the pyramid of this business, right?
And finally, as we wind this down, I mean, President Rodrigo Chaves, again, as we mentioned previously, shaking things up, trying to take on the traditional political elites. I think we've suggested that there's a petulance there of the way he speaks and attacks the press. But let's talk about the future of the welfare state in Costa Rica. Where do we see it progressing at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a very important element in our society. This society was built in a compromise. We have a compromise, a common compromise, that in order to provide access to health, better education, more jobs, and also to protect the environment. And we also have a compromise in introducing reforms and to modernize all these dimensions using the democratic mechanisms. And we know that the current government emphasizes on the fiscal austerity, right? And they are cutting budgets for services that are very relevant for our people, especially public education. They're cutting some resources for transportation, for poor child, for food, providing food during the child or during the high or during the school time, right? For high school, for primary school, right? And also for providing to sponsor kids to go to school. So it is important for our country, for our society, to to avoid sacrificing these funds or services, public services that are so relevant for our people, especially for the most vulnerable people or neighbors in our country.
So, I mean, Costa Rica is running an immense fiscal debt, and this is where they're looking to cut budgets. But this could really turn the people against the administration. 50%, 50+% approval right now, but let's say early next year, if more budgets are cut, we can see that approval rating tumbling.
Exactly. Especially because education is very important. So people, in Costa Rica, citizens, they have high expectations, very high expectations about education, about health, about security as well, security, and many other aspects. So we identify some risk in terms of our political or our policies related to protection or to protect the environment because of these cuttings, or because ambiguity, or because sometimes we are looking or we are in serious risk of diminishing the public mechanisms or tools or institutions or capacities to protect our environment. So now we have to take this situation seriously and say, well, we have debt, we have public debt. Right now the situation is better. Now it is time not to commit the same mistakes we ended up doing in the 80s. Right?
So certainly some very challenging 2 years ahead for the administration of the president. And Well, I mean, how do you see it unfolding? As a final question, how do you see it unfolding?
Yeah, that they are, there is a lot of uncertainty about this kind of thing, right? Also, we have local elections in February next year, so early in the so. Well, I'm not saying that the government is gonna have, or usually national governments they do not have like a lot of control of the municipalities, because in Costa Rica municipalities are funded by, especially by their own resources, not to national governments. But we have local elections early next year, and we are gonna start the second part of the administration soon. And well, the questions here is, or the big questions are, how are we going to do with the education, security, health, especially for the most vulnerable people?
Well, thank you very much. We've been speaking to Ronald Alfaro-Redondo, who is a researcher of political science at the Department of Political Science, the University of Costa Rica, and a researcher of the State of the Nation program there in Costa Rica. Do check out the State of the Nation report, which is found at the website in Spanish, estadonacion.org.cr, and you can find links to that report available now. Ronald, thank you so much for your time and sharing news from Costa Rica. Always a pleasure to hear about this country, because it doesn't get much coverage, but we do know it as the great country with no army and stability there in Central America, very much opposite to a lot of the countries around it. So it's refreshing to hear about Costa Rica, even though it's a challenging time ahead.
Yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. Again, it was my real pleasure to be here. And yeah, we're gonna see how things evolve in the near future.
We'll be watching as well. And of course, that is the final episode done here for the LatinNews Podcast for 2023. You can catch up with all previous episodes in this period, and we will be back on the 16th of January discussing Argentina and, of course, future President Milei. So thank you again for listening and for your support all of this year. The LatinNews Podcast will be back in 2024. I've been Richard McCall, your host, and goodbye.